Have you caught yourself going down the spiral lately, thinking, what if this turns into something bigger? What if my spouse deploys? What if everything changes overnight? If you have been living in that loop of what ifs, this episode is for you. Because when we react, it's easy to fall into an anxiety spiral, thinking about all the potential implications for our family. And it's easy to stay there, replaying everything that could go wrong. I don't want you to bury your head in the sand and ignore what's going on, but I do want you to have strategies for how to stay informed without letting uncertainty about the future create more worry, stress, and anxiety than is actually necessary. Welcome to More Than a Milspouse, the podcast for military spouses who want to live with more meaning and less overwhelm. I'm your host, Christine, seasoned military spouse, mom of 3, life coach, and your guide to intentionally designing a life you're excited about as a military spouse. I'm here to help you get the clarity you need so you can get unstuck and unlock your purpose and potential. Because you, my friend, are more than a milspouse. You have something valuable to offer. And when you pursue the things that light your heart on fire, you trade frustration for fulfillment and isolation for a life of impact. It's time to discover who you are meant to be, because together we can change the world. Hello, friend. I hope your week is off to a decent start. I can't believe we're here at the end of another month. In just a few short weeks, the Packers are going to be at my house, beginning to box things up for yet another move. And that will kick off my 3rd summer in a row of living out of suitcases. I am excited for what's next and for the potential that it could be more than a 1-year assignment. And I'm holding on to the hope that this move feels a little more stable. Coming here and knowing that we were just going to have a 10 to 11 month assignment was hard, in the sense that it's hard to feel like you really belong when you know something is that temporary. But it's been a good year, and I just want to be honest about where I'm at as I am facing the uncertainty and unknown of what's next for our family. And as I know there's so much uncertainty and unknown about what's going on in the world right now, about more U.S. troops heading to the Middle East. And I felt like this was a really good week to talk about living with what ifs and how to respond to the uncertainty we feel in this lifestyle. So for those of us who are quote unquote seasoned military spouses, we've been in this lifestyle for a while. We walked into this life knowing that it meant deployments to the Middle East. My husband's first deployment when we were dating, it came about, we'd been dating for about 9-10 months, I think, at that point. Conflict in the Middle East has been something that's been a part of our entire journey together. And I remember as a new military spouse, attending these briefings about OPSEC and about what to say, what I couldn't say. I remember key spouses checking in. I remembered deployed family dinners and being encouraged to stay connected, to support your spouse, and to connect with the military community, even if your spouse was deployed. And a lot has changed over the years. I think in particular, 2020 shifted a lot about how we connect. And it's meant a lot more virtual connections, a lot less connecting in person. That shifts how we get to know one another, how we show up for one another. And to be completely honest, a lot of the support systems that used to exist for families don't exist in the same way. They aren't what they used to be. I remember we moved after 2020, and I'm trying to figure out how do we connect people, because we still have this need for community and connection, and it's changed, right? And so I'm going to the installation that we're at, and I'm like, okay, how are we supporting families of deployed military members? And they're like, well, we don't really track that anymore. So the systems have changed, but what hasn't changed is the need to know how to respond to uncertainty in this lifestyle. And while I would love for the systems and processes that help families to be immediately stood back up, I know that that takes time and energy, and it's usually the result of the work of volunteers who are spending their time to make sure that families are taken care of. Now, it has been this way for a very long time. I went on the Hickam Historical Tour when we lived in Hawaii. If you ever get the chance to go, definitely go. It is a fantastic opportunity to learn about what it was like to be there on December 7th, 1941, when Pearl Harbor was bombed, and specifically what it was like for the airmen at Hickam Airfield. Jessie Higa leads this tour. She knows all of the families of those killed at Hickam Airfield on that day. It is incredible. But one of the things that struck me most on this tour was how much the wives of the airmen at the time planned for what they would do in case of an attack. They had already decided who's going to take care of the children, who's going to organize support, who's going to feed families. They had a plan. And today, a lot of us don't feel like we have that, because we don't. We're not connected in the same way that they were. And yet, here we are, potentially getting involved in another conflict in the Middle East. And so a lot of us have a lot of questions about this. And I want to address some of these questions you may have thought or may have voiced recently. Number one, what does this mean for my family? Is my spouse going to deploy? How soon will they deploy? What does that mean for our family? How will this impact our daily life? Why is this happening? Are we headed into a full-scale war? How do I handle uncertainty and fear? And maybe the biggest question of all, how in the world am I supposed to go build a life I love in the midst of this chaos and uncertainty? Now, I can't answer all of those questions. I don't have enough information to really explain why this is happening or what this means for you and your spouse in particular. I don't have a way to predict what's going to happen or how any of this is going to unfold. But what I can do is share what has helped me navigate this lifestyle for almost 18 years of uncertainty. And as I was thinking through, what are the things that have really helped me over the last several years? The most important thing, I think, is to limit input. When everything feels uncertain, the natural instinct is give me more information. Help me find certainty. Help me understand what's going on and what I can do. And for most of us, this can look like constantly checking the news or refreshing social media and trying to piece together on our own what's going on, what's happening, why it's happening, and what we can do about it. And here's what I've had to learn. You have to set a limit to how much you consume. I definitely made this mistake during COVID. I kept reading all of these new news articles about what was going on and what might happen and what we knew and what we didn't know. And I finally realized all of this was just making me more anxious. When I started limiting my consumption of information, it actually helped me recenter myself and stop spiraling into an anxiety loop. So number one was just limiting the amount of information you consume. I don't want you to bury your head in the sand, but you have to set a limit on how much you consume. Otherwise, it will consume you. Number two is focusing on what you can control. Because when your brain is constantly taking in information about things it can't control, it starts trying to solve problems it doesn't have answers to. And that's where the spiral really starts. So one of the most helpful shifts you can make is to focus your time and attention on what you can control. Because your brain can only consciously focus on one thing at a time. So when you are choosing to focus on things within your control, then you're going to spend less time thinking about what ifs and things you can't control. Now, I know the temptation is to try to control everything around you, which can also have some negative effects. But when you start focusing on yourself and how you're showing up and the rhythms and routines and habits that you are developing, then you're putting the focus on yourself and what you can control and stop trying to control outcomes, circumstances, and what other people do. So do focus on yourself and what is within your control. Number three is to not ignore your feelings, because you can't just distract yourself out of anxiety. The feelings are still there. If you try to ignore those feelings, they don't just go away. The more that you try to bury the fear or the worry or whatever, it lingers there. And one of the most helpful things for me has been to simply write out what I'm feeling and where it's coming from. Because once I can name that and start to notice that, then I can ask myself how I want to respond. So I'm acknowledging the feeling, but I'm not letting the feeling dictate how I respond. And before we keep going, I just want you to pause with me for a second and think about if there is a what if that has been taking up space in your mind lately. It could be big, it could be small, but a lot of times we have a what if, thinking about something in the future that we can't control, and it's taking a lot of brain space in our mind. So just choose one. It doesn't have to be big, but when you can begin to name it, then that empowers you to start choosing how you respond to that. The next thing I would say is to, and this is probably the most practical thing, but just to prepare. Once you have created a little bit of space mentally and emotionally, you can start thinking more clearly about what actually needs your attention right now. And this is a great time to practically prepare for a potential deployment, getting those wills and powers of attorney if necessary, talking together with your spouse about finances, making sure that you have access to all of the necessary accounts so that if your spouse is out of pocket, you can handle everything that needs to be handled while they're gone. So we are preparing not from a place of anxiety or panic, but from a place of steadiness. So those things that you start to think about, if my spouse were gone, do I have all of the information? Could I go get the car taken care of? Could I have access to make sure all of the bills are paid? All of those things happen when you prepare now. The next piece, and I kind of already touched on this in the beginning, but community is so important. Make sure you have a supportive community. I know that this is easier said than done, especially if you're brand new somewhere. It takes time to find your people, but it truly does take a village. And sometimes that community comes through your spouse's unit. Sometimes that comes through a base spouse club. Sometimes that comes through a church or a neighborhood or even your children's sports team. But here's the thing. None of us was ever meant to do this life alone. It does take a village, and I've seen this play out so many times. And it's amazing what happens when people step up and are a part of your village. When my husband's first deployment after we were married, someone from the church volunteered, just showed up and started mowing my yard every week. I never even asked for this, but the church saw an opportunity to help, and that was huge. It was a huge weight off my shoulders at the time. Recently, my husband was gone for a few weeks, and I had kids who felt like they all needed to be going in completely different directions. And I was like, I don't know how to get everybody where they need to go without spending hours and hours in the car. And I was able to let couple of my kids go down to a neighbor's house while I'm getting another kid somewhere else. And I was able to rely on those neighbors to be my village when my spouse was gone and couldn't help. And that took a huge weight off my shoulders. That's what community does. So if you don't have that kind of community, now's the time to really start developing that, digging in, looking for ways to find people to build a community and a support network that will help you if you're trying to do life alone. So those are foundational things, right? We're focusing on limiting and setting boundaries around the information we consume so that we're not spiraling into anxiety. We're focusing on what we can control, not about things that we can't control. We're acknowledging our feelings. We're taking steps to prepare in case our spouse needs to leave, and we're building community. Those are important. But I want to address the question underneath all of this. We know that life can change overnight. That vacation that you spent the last 6 or 9 months planning for, that just gets scrapped. The family reunion that you now have to attend alone. The kids' activities or the tournament that your kid is in, but now your spouse has to spend the weekend working, right? You might be solo parenting for the foreseeable future. And when all these things happen, the question is it still possible to build a life you love in the midst of military life? And the answer is, it depends. If a life you love means never dealing with uncertainty, if it means living near family, if it means not having to worry about deployment, if it means trying to control all of your circumstances, life's going to feel really hard. You're going to struggle. But if we can shift that definition of a life we love to a life that feels more grounded, present, purposeful, regardless of our circumstances or where we live, then it's absolutely possible. We can find ways to do things that light us up, that bring us joy, that fill our cup, and that help us live a more meaningful life, even in the midst of what ifs, the uncertainty, the hard, and the not so fun. Because when our life and having a life we love doesn't depend on external circumstances, that's when we truly begin to thrive. Now, If this is something that does not come easy for you or that you're struggling to feel, that is completely normal. Especially as a type A person, this was something that I had to work on a lot. Sometimes we all get stuck focusing on external things rather than focusing on how we can show up, who we want to be, how we are becoming, and what we can do to live a life of purpose right where we are. This is absolutely a season of uncertainty and what ifs for many of us. But it does not have to be a season of anxiety and fear. And if you are noticing that fear, that anxiety, don't try to carry that alone. If you need support, if you need to talk to someone, talk to someone. Don't keep it to yourself. Find someone who can help you through walking through this season. Or come inside our free Facebook community and share what if are you working through right now, or what's something that has helped you stay grounded in seasons like this. Because we don't navigate uncertainty well in isolation. The more that we try to hold it in, the more that it's going to fester, the more that we're going to continue to struggle with it. We need to walk this out, talk this out in community, because, as I always say, we are better together. The what ifs might not go away, but you get to decide whether you spiral in them or respond with intention. If you would like some coaching support, you can find the ways that we can work together on my website or by clicking the link in the show notes. Next week, we're going to talk more about this theme of uncertainty and the both and of holding on and letting go in military life. Until then, may you live filled, fueled, and full of joy. Hey, amazing milspouse, before you go, I want you to know that I love hearing from you. The More Than a Milspouse community exists to help you thrive as a military spouse. Figure out what lights your heart on fire and empower you to live with purpose and impact. You can have an incredible impact simply by heading over to iTunes to subscribe and leave a review. But your impact doesn't stop there. You can empower those around you simply by sharing an episode with a friend or neighbor, someone who needs a little encouragement in this military life. And if this episode was meaningful to you, spread the love by taking a screenshot of this episode and tagging me on Instagram so we can continue to reach more people, change more lives, and shift the way that military spouses look at life. Because we are better together, and together we can change the world. Let's do it.